My name is Evelyn Marsh. I'm 31 years old, and I've been a paramedic with the City of Portland Fire Bureau for the past 9 years. People hear that and they picture someone tough, someone who doesn't cry at funerals or flinch at blood or lie awake at 3 in the morning replaying the ones they couldn't save. Maybe I used to be that person. Or maybe I just got good at pretending. What I know for certain is that nothing in 9 years of running calls, not the overdoses, not the pediatric codes, not the night a semi rolled on the Burnside Bridge and we worked the scene for 6 hours straight, nothing prepared me for the text my mother sent 40 minutes before my sister's rehearsal dinner. It came while I was in the hotel bathroom, trying to get my hair to cooperate with the humidity. My phone buzzed on the counter and I glanced at it the way you do, half expecting a parking reminder or a promotional email. Instead, it was 4 sentences. No greeting. Evelyn, we've decided it's better if you don't come tonight. It's Cassidy's night and you always make things about yourself. The family agrees. Please respect this. I read it twice. Then I set the phone face down on the counter and looked at my own reflection for a long moment. The woman looking back at me had her uniform off for the first time in 11 days. She had circles under her eyes that concealer couldn't fully cover. She had a dress she'd driven 4 hours to wear to her little sister's rehearsal dinner. I picked the phone back up and typed, "Understood. Congratulations to Cassidy." I sent it. I put the phone in my bag, and then I sat down on the edge of the tub for a while because my legs felt strange. I want to be clear about something. I'm not telling this story because I want sympathy. I'm telling it because I spent 31 years believing that if I worked hard enough, was good enough, quiet enough, grateful enough, the people who were supposed to love me would eventually see me. I'm telling it because the night I finally stopped believing that was also the night someone else did something I never expected. My mother always had a reason. That's the thing about families like mine. The rejection never comes without a reason, and the reason always sounds just reasonable enough to make you question yourself. You were too sensitive. You were too distracted with work. You said the wrong thing at Christmas. You wore the wrong expression at Grandma's birthday. There was always something. And I had spent most of my adult life performing a constant, exhausting audit of my own behavior. Trying to find the flaw, trying to fix it, trying to earn my way back into a warmth that I'm not sure was ever really there to begin with. My sister Cassidy was 3 years younger and effortless in all the ways I wasn't. She laughed easily. She cried prettily. She never asked too many questions or pushed back on anything, or brought home news that made my mother's face go tight with something she wouldn't name. When Cassidy announced her engagement to a man named Reeve, an orthodontist from Lake Oswego, exactly the kind of man my mother had always wanted for her daughters, just not for me. The whole family lit up like a house at Christmas. I drove 4 hours down from Portland with a card and a bottle of good wine and a heart that was trying, genuinely trying, to just be happy for her. I'd been trying for a long time. The first time I understood, I was different in my family's eyes. I was probably 8 or 9. My brother Derek had just made the travel soccer team and my mother threw him a little party. Pizza, balloons, the whole thing. I remember watching from the doorway of the kitchen while everyone clustered around him. I had gotten straight A's that same week. I had a folder with a gold star on it in my backpack. Nobody asked. I'm not bitter about it now. Or I try not to be. But those things stick to you in ways you don't fully understand until you're an adult sitting in a hotel bathroom reading a text from your mother and feeling 8 years old all over again. I booked the hotel because I didn't want to stay in my parents' house. I'd learned that years ago. Having my own room, my own exit, my own car in the lot. It was the only way I could manage these visits without coming apart. The rehearsal dinner was at a restaurant called Lantern and Vine, a converted farmhouse about 20 minutes outside Portland, the kind of place that charged $40 for a salad and made it feel worth it somehow. I had a reservation there. My name was on the guest list. I'd confirmed it 3 weeks ago. I sat in that hotel bathroom for longer than I should have, long enough for the hair product to dry wrong and my dress to wrinkle slightly from where I'd been sitting. Then I stood up, smoothed the dress, and made a decision. I was going. Not out of spite, not to make a scene. I had learned a long time ago that making scenes didn't do anything except to give people a reason to say you were the problem. I was going because I had driven 4 hours and I had done nothing wrong, and because some quiet, tired part of me was done with the idea that I owed anyone my absence. The drive to the restaurant was 23 minutes. I had the windows down even though it was a little cold. The Oregon hills in October have a smell to them. Pine and wood smoke and something almost sweet, and I needed it that night. I needed to feel like the world outside my family was still real. I found parking around the back and sat in my car for a moment. Through the restaurant's tall windows, I could see the warm yellow glow of the private dining room where they were all gathered. I could see my mother in a lavender dress I didn't recognize. I could see Cassidy laughing, her head tipped back, her hand on Reeves' arm. I could see my father, steady and predictable in his beige sport coat, speaking to someone I didn't know. None of them were looking for me. None of them expected me to come. I got out of the car. The hostess at the front was young, early 20s, with a professional smile that didn't waver when she checked the list. She found my name, gave me a pleasant nod, and pointed me toward the private room. My heels on the hardwood floor sounded very loud to me. The restaurant was mostly full, couples and small groups in candlelight, the low murmur of nice evening conversation. I pushed open the door to the private room. The table went quiet in a way that wasn't the usual pause when a new person enters. It was the specific quiet of people who were not expecting you and are not sure what to do with the fact that you're there. My mother's face went very still. My brother Derek's wife, Tina, leaned slightly toward him. Cassidy looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully read, something between guilt and alarm. I smiled. I found an empty chair at the far end of the table and I sat down. No one said anything to me directly for the first 20 minutes. The conversations resumed around me like water finding its way around a rock. I drank my water. I looked at the menu. A server came and I ordered the salmon. I thought, doing extremely well. Then my mother stood up. She came to my end of the table quietly, which should have been a warning. My mother in public was always quiet. It was the privacy of home where she let things go sharp. She bent slightly and said in a voice meant only for me, "I asked you not to come." "I know," I said. "You're being selfish." "I drove 4 hours," I said, still quietly. "I'm eating dinner. I'm not making a speech." Her jaw tightened. "You always do this. You always have to insert yourself. This is Cassidy's night." I looked at her. I had looked at her so many times over the years, trying to find the version of her that made sense, the one where her behavior added up to something other than what it seemed. That night, I just felt tired. "I'll sit here quietly," I said. "I won't bother anyone." She straightened. For a moment she stood there as if deciding something, and then she turned and spoke, not loudly, but loud enough, to the general end of the table. "Maybe we should give Evelyn a seat at the bar. Give everyone a little more room." A few heads turned. Reeves' mother, a perfectly composed woman in pearls, looked at her wine glass. Cassidy stared at the centerpiece. My father adjusted his silverware. And then the server who had taken my order. A woman, maybe mid-40s, dark hair, a calm face, paused near the doorway and looked at the table. She'd clearly heard. She didn't move right away. She just stood there with a tray balanced on one hand and a very deliberate stillness about her. I stood up before anyone had to say anything else. I picked up my water glass and my clutch and I walked out to the bar and I sat down on a stool and I ordered a glass of Willamette Valley Pinot Noir because if I was going to be exiled, I was going to be exiled with a decent glass of wine. The bar area was quieter than the dining room. A few couples on date nights. A man at the end nursing a whiskey. The bartender, a young guy with a friendly face, set down a coaster without making a big deal of anything, which I appreciated. I sat there and I thought about the last shift I had worked before driving down. A 67-year-old man named Eugene. Cardiac arrest on the kitchen floor while his dog sat next to him and wouldn't leave. We got him back. I remember the exact pressure I'd applied, the rhythm of compressions, the moment his pulse came back under my fingertips. I thought about how in that kitchen I had known exactly what I was and what I was worth. I thought about how strange it was that the same body, the same hands, could feel so capable in one place and so unwanted in another. I didn't cry. I want to be clear about that. I was past crying in public about my family. I had done that in my 20s and it had never helped anything. I was about 10 minutes into my wine when I felt someone settle onto the stool beside me. I assumed it was the woman from the date night couple looking to flag the bartender, so I shifted slightly to give her room. "Excuse me." The voice was warm, measured. "I don't want to intrude." I turned. The woman sitting next to me was probably 60, maybe 65. Silver hair cut short and neat. She wore a dark blazer over a simple blouse, and she had the kind of posture you don't develop by accident. Straight, unhurried, like she'd decided long ago exactly how much space she was entitled to take up. "You're not intruding," I said, because it seemed like the polite thing to say. She looked at me for a moment in a way that was direct without being aggressive. "I was at the table in the corner," she said. "I saw what happened." I turned back to my wine. "Just a family thing." "I know what a family thing looks like," she said. And then, after a pause, "I also know what it looks like when someone handles it with more grace than it deserves." I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything. She was quiet for a moment too, and then she said, "What do you do? If you don't mind my asking." I glanced at her. "I'm a paramedic." Something shifted in her face. Not surprise exactly. Something more like recognition. "Portland?" "Yes." She nodded slowly. She looked back at her own drink, sparkling water, I noticed, with a slice of wine. "I was the chief medical officer for Multnomah County for 11 years, she said. "Before that, I ran the county's EMS division." I looked at her more directly now. "I know the bureau," she said. "I know what that job is. I know what it takes." She paused. "I also know it's the kind of work that very few people around a dinner table will ever really understand." I was quiet for a moment. Outside, through the window, I could see the parking lot, the hills just visible against the darkening sky. "My family thinks I use it as an excuse," I said. And I wasn't sure why I was saying this to a stranger, except that sometimes strangers are the only people you can actually tell the truth to miss things, to be unavailable. They've never really understood the schedule, the toll of it. She was quiet in the way that meant she was listening, not waiting to talk. "I missed my cousin's wedding because I was working a mass casualty on the 205, I said. 3 cars, a motorcycle, a semi. 7 patients. I triaged a 22-year-old with a traumatic brain injury and I held his airway for 40 minutes because we were short on units and I wasn't going to let him die on the shoulder of a highway." I stopped. My aunt didn't speak to me for 2 years. The woman beside me said nothing for a moment. "Then, what was his name?" I looked at her. "The young man," she said. I thought about it. "We never found out," I said. "We never found out," I said. "We handed off and I never saw him again." She nodded. "That's the part they don't see," she said quietly. "The ones you hand off and never hear about again. The ones who go home to their families while you go home to yours and can't explain why you're somewhere else in your head." I looked at her for a long moment. "You get it," I said. "I spent 15 years getting it," she said, and she smiled, just slightly. We sat in a comfortable quiet for a minute or so. The noise from the private dining room filtered through. Laughter, someone tapping a glass for a toast. I felt the warmth of the wine and the strange, unlooked-for relief of being understood by a stranger in a way I hadn't been understood in a long time. That's when the door from the private room opened. The server who had been near the doorway earlier, the one who had paused and looked at our table, came out and approached the bar. She spoke quietly to the bartender, who nodded and picked up the restaurant's phone. I didn't think anything of it. Restaurants have logistics. Things happen. Then she walked over to me. "Ms. Marsh," she said. Her voice was low, professional. I straightened slightly. "Yes. I'm so sorry to bother you," she said. "But we had a situation come up. One of the guests in the private room," she paused. "He's having some kind of episode. Chest pain. Some kind of episode. Chest pain. He's conscious, but he's scared, and we've called 911, but our manager mentioned you were a paramedic, and I didn't know if... I was off the stool before she finished the sentence. The private room felt different when I walked back in. The easy warmth of the dinner party had collapsed into something tighter, more frightened. Reeves' father. A heavy-set man in his late 60s named Mel, whom I'd met twice before, was seated at the far end of the table, leaning forward with one hand pressed flat against his chest. His face was gray and damp. His wife was crouched beside him, her hand on his shoulder, her face trying very hard to be calm. I moved to him directly. I heard a chair scrape behind me as someone shifted. I heard my mother say something I didn't catch. "Mel," I said, crouching to his level. "My name is Evelyn. I'm a paramedic. Can you tell me what you're feeling?" He looked at me with the specific eyes of someone who is frightened and trying not to show it. "Pressure," he said. Here." He touched the center of his chest. "Started about 10 minutes ago. I thought it was the food. Has it spread anywhere?" "Arm, jaw, back, left arm," he said. "A little." I looked up at the server. "Do you have an AED on the premises?" "Yes, by the front entrance." "Get it. And have someone meet the ambulance outside and bring them directly here." I turned back to Mel. "I need you to stay as still and calm as you can. Are you on any blood thinners? Any heart medications?" While he answered, "Metoprolol, yes, for blood pressure, no history of cardiac events." I was already noting his skin color, the slight irregularity in his breathing, the way he was holding himself. My hands found his wrist automatically. His pulse was elevated and uneven. "Mel, I need you to chew this for me." I had found the aspirin at the small first aid kit the server had appeared with, reading my mind. He complied. His wife held his other hand, and I could see her squeezing it hard enough that her knuckles were pale. I worked him for 11 minutes before the fire department paramedics came through the door. 11 minutes of talking him to his breathing, monitoring his pulse, keeping him focused and present and not in the spiral that cardiac patients go into when they're convinced they're dying. I handed off a clean report, onset, presentation, vitals, medications, the way I had done hundreds of times. The lead paramedic, a guy about my age named Torres, gave me a quick nod of acknowledgement. The professional kind. The kind that means, "Good job, I've got it." As they moved Mel out on the stretcher, his wife stopped beside me for just a moment. She was still in her pearls. Her eyes were wet. "Thank you," she said. It came out barely above a whisper. "He's going to be okay," I said. "They're good. You go with him." She went. The room was very quiet after that. I became aware of the fact that I was standing in the middle of the private dining room at my sister's rehearsal dinner, among my family, in the dress I'd driven 4 hours to wear, and that every single one of them was looking at me. Reeves stood near the wall, his face pale and open with something that looked like shock. Cassidy's hands were pressed against her mouth. Derek was very still. Tina was staring at the floor. My father had his elbows on the table, his head slightly bowed, and my mother stood near the window with her arms crossed, and for the first time in my adult life, she looked small to me. Not vindictive. Not cold. Just small. Like someone who has been carrying a particular story about the world and has just been shown that the story was wrong. No one said anything for a long moment. Then Cassidy crossed the room and put her arms around me, and she held on in a way she hadn't since we were kids. And she said, close to my ear, "Evelyn, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry we did that." I let her hold me. I didn't say it was okay because it wasn't, not entirely. But I held her back because she was my sister and I loved her, and some things don't disappear just because they're complicated. It was Reeve who spoke next. He came over and shook my hand, really shook it, both hands, the kind of handshake that means something, and said, "My dad would have died tonight. I need you to know that I understand that." I nodded. I was holding myself together with the kind of discipline that 9 years of emergencies will either teach you or break you. Then I became aware of the woman from the bar standing in the doorway. She had followed me in. She'd been there the whole time, I realized, standing just inside the doorway with her arms at her sides, watching. The restaurant manager was beside her, speaking quietly. I caught pieces of it. She's the former county CMO. She said she wanted to make sure. And then something else I didn't fully hear. The woman met my eyes across the room. She didn't say anything dramatic. She just gave me a small nod. The kind that says, I saw. My mother was still standing by the window. I looked at her. She was looking at me with that expression I had been searching her face for my whole life. Not love, exactly. Or not just love, but something I'd come to think she wasn't capable of. Recognition. The acknowledgement that I was a real person, a whole person, and that what she had seen tonight was not a performance for her benefit, but simply who I had always been. She didn't cross the room. She didn't apologize with words, at least not that night. But her arms came down from where they'd been crossed and her chin dipped just slightly, and she looked away toward the window. Outside, I could hear the ambulance pulling out of the parking lot. I could hear the sound of the world continuing on. I didn't need the apology, or I didn't need it the way I used to, urgently, desperately, as though it were the one thing standing between me and being okay. I had been okay for a long time in spite of them. That was the truth they'd never given me credit for. I excused myself from the room and stepped out through the restaurant and into the parking lot. The October air was cold and clean, and I stood in it for a few minutes, feeling the adrenaline cycle down through my system the way it always does after a call. My hands were steady. They always are during. It's after that the shake wants to come. I was standing by my car when I heard footsteps behind me. Evelyn. I turned. The woman from the bar was walking toward me across the parking lot. She had her coat on now and her keys in her hand. She stopped a few feet away. I wanted to say something before you left, she said. I've spent a lot of years in emergency medicine in this city. A lot of years watching what this work costs people and what it asks of them. She paused. What you did in there tonight. The instinct, the calm, the handoff. That's not just training, that's character. You should know that. I looked at her. Thank you, I said. And then, because it was true, that actually means something coming from you. She smiled slightly. It should. She reached into her jacket pocket and took out a business card and held it out. I sit on the advisory board for the Bureau's Leadership Development Program, she said. We have 2 paramedic slots opening for supervisory track next spring. I'd like you to consider applying. I took the card. I looked at it. Dr. Linda Forsyth. The card read. Multnomah County Emergency Medical Services. Medical Advisor. Bureau of Emergency Communications. I'll consider it, I said. Good. She put her hands in her coat pockets. Drive safe. She walked to her car, and I stood there in the parking lot with her card in my hand, and for a moment I just listened to the quiet. The hills. The October. The distant sound of the highway somewhere past the trees. I thought about Mel and the gurney being loaded into the back of the rig. I thought about Torres and his crew working him on the way to Providence, talking him through it. I thought about how in 3 or 4 days, if the stars lined up right, Mel would probably be sitting up in a hospital bed giving his wife a hard time about the food. I thought about how Reeve and Cassidy would get married in the spring and Mel would walk her down the aisle and no one except the people in that restaurant tonight would ever know how close it had been. I thought about how none of the things that had happened to me tonight, none of the dismissals, the text message, being walked to the bar like a problem to be managed, any of it changed what I was and what I had done and what I would keep doing. There was something freeing about that. I don't know how else to put it. I had spent my whole life trying to make them see me, and the thing that finally happened wasn't anything I engineered or intended or wished for. It was just me, being exactly what I'd always been, in a moment that happened to be visible. And it turned out I didn't need their recognition to know my own worth. I had just forgotten that for a while. I drove back to the hotel with the windows down, the cold air moving through the car. I took a long, hot shower and I got into bed and I slept better than I had in months. 3 days later, when I was back in Portland, I got a voicemail from Cassidy. It was 7 minutes long. She cried through most of it. She talked about things that had happened when we were kids, things she had watched happen and not said anything about, and she was sorry. She was genuinely sorry, and she knew sorry wasn't enough. But she wanted to start somewhere. I listened to it twice, then I saved it. I'm not telling you that everything is fixed. It isn't. Families like mine don't fix overnight, and maybe some of what was broken between us is just broken. My mother sent a card, a real card, not a text, with a single line inside, "I didn't see you clearly. I want to do better." 7 words. I held the card for a long time before I put it down. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't resolution. It was a door cracked open, and I was deciding whether to walk through it. What I know is this: I don't wait for their permission anymore. Not to be proud of what I do. Not to take up space at a table. Not to show up. The supervisory track application is sitting on my kitchen counter. I've read it through twice. On my last shift, we ran a pediatric respiratory call. A 4-year-old who is okay, who is absolutely fine, and my partner said afterward that she learns something every time she works with me. She said it the way people say things when they mean them, offhandedly, without looking up from her paperwork. I thought about the woman in the restaurant, the card in my pocket, the small ways that being seen by the right person at the right moment can change the direction of a thing. I picked up the pen. I've thought about that night a lot since it happened. Not obsessively, I don't have the energy for obsessive anymore, but in the quiet way you turn something over in your hands when you're trying to understand the shape of it. What I keep coming back to is this: nothing about that night was planned. I didn't go to that restaurant to prove anything. I didn't walk back into that private room with any agenda except doing my job. And that's the part I find most worth sitting with. The moments that actually change things are almost never the ones you engineer. They're the ones where you just keep being who you are, even when everything around you is telling you that who you are isn't enough. I spent years trying to earn something from my family that I now understand wasn't theirs to give. Not because they were monsters, but because people can only offer you the version of recognition they're capable of, and some people are only capable of a very narrow kind. My mother spent decades seeing me through a lens she had built early and never really questioned. I was the difficult one. The one who left. The one whose work she couldn't explain at dinner parties without it sounding like an accusation. What happened with Mel wasn't a punishment for her, and it wasn't a reward for me. It was just cause and effect. 9 years of training, 9 years of showing up to scenes that most people couldn't walk toward, 9 years of keeping my hands steady even when my chest wanted to cave. All of that was simply present in the room when it was needed. That's all. You put in the work for long enough, and the work becomes part of you, and then one night at a rehearsal dinner in the Oregon Hills, it saves someone's father-in-law while your family watches. There's something Dr. Forsyth said to me in that parking lot that I've thought about often. She said what she saw in that room wasn't just training. She said it was character. I didn't fully accept that in the moment. I nodded and said, "Thank you, because that's what you do." But I've turned it over enough times now that I think I understand what she meant. Training tells you what to do. Character is what makes you do it without hesitating when the situation is uncomfortable, when the people watching you are the exact people who told you not to be there. Cassidy's voicemail is still saved in my phone. I've listened to it maybe 4 times total. I don't need to listen to it more than that. What matters isn't the apology itself. Apologies are words, and words have always been cheap in my family. What matters is that she made the call at all. That she sat down and let herself feel the weight of it and then did something with that weight instead of just setting it down and walking away. That took something. I want to give her credit for that. The application for the supervisory track is in. I submitted it on a Tuesday morning before a shift in the parking lot of Station 1, in the same jacket I'd worn to the rehearsal dinner. I don't know if I'll get it. I know I'm qualified. I know I have things to offer people who are just starting out in this work. Things nobody taught me and I had to find on my own. Whether that's enough, we'll see. What I know for certain is that I'm done making myself smaller to fit inside spaces that were never built for me. Not at a dinner table, not in a family, not anywhere. The work I do is real. The lives I've touched are real. And I don't need anyone's permission to know that anymore. I picked up the pen. That's where I am.